Good morning, Rock the Closing listeners. So excited to have you back. And we are super excited to have yet another guest with us. You've heard Orsolya and I speak plenty about the closing process, the buying process. And so we have today with us somebody from a title insurance company. I know you've heard us talk a lot about title here and there, but we haven't really gotten too in depth with it. So we would like to welcome to our podcast, Miss Stephanie Lenti. She is Senior Managing Director of Business Development with Newmark Title Insurance. This is a highly reputable title company in New York, and they will get you through any closing as a buyer. They do residential closings. They will take care of anything you need in terms of the searches, the violations, all the things that we're going to talk about. Stephanie's contact information, if you have any other questions after the podcast, is stephanie.lenti@nmrk.com. That's STEPHanie.LENTI@nmrk.com. And if you need to reach her, her phone number is 917-224-4840. All this information will also be on the website, so don't feel you have to scramble and write it down now. You know us. Okay, so let's get right into it with Stephanie. Welcome to the podcast, Stephanie.
I'm so excited to be with you ladies today.
Thank you. Thank you. We love to talk about title. Could you tell us a little bit about the Newmark Title Company and what their role is in any real estate transaction?
Newmark Title Company is part of the Newmark family. Newmark is a publicly traded company, and we're a premier title agent. We have access to multiple underwriters, and our role in the process is really to close the transaction. So what we do is we provide, we apply all our resources, our network, our expertise, and we guaranteed smooth closings. We're able to do that throughout the United States on commercial transactions, and we also do residential transactions in New York and the metro area, so New Jersey, Pennsylvania, the regional area, and record all documents onto the public record. That's something we do at the end of the closing to ensure that, title is clear going forward.
Thank you, Stephanie. It's really wonderful having you in our podcast, and I have had the pleasure working with your company, and you have always ensured a very, very smooth transaction and a very smooth closing. And just for everyone out there, it makes a closing so much more enjoyable if you have Newmark on your side, because they really make it happen and they really rock the closings, as we like to say on our podcast. Stephanie, for our listeners who are not familiar with what a title company is doing, could you help us walk us through a little bit and explain what is the title search and why is that important?
Absolutely. It's a really good question. But before I start on what the title search is, let's talk about why it's important. And to know why it's important, you have to know a little bit of history here as to why we even have title insurance. So back in 1868, there was this gentleman named Watson who wanted to purchase a home. He reached out to this gentleman named Muirhead, who was a conveyancer. Now, this was the process back then. You would hire a conveyancer and they would check the records, go around town, ask questions, and make sure that the property was free and clear of any ownership issues, any liens, encumbrances, that all documents were executed correctly, there was no fraud or anything of that nature. So lo and behold, Muirhead in his research found an open lien. He was not sure if it was valid to the property, so he went to another professional, a real estate attorney, and he asked the attorney, what are your thoughts? Do you think this is valid? The attorney looked at the lien and gave his professional opinion that it was not valid, it was not attached to the property, and that the transaction was okay to close. Lo and behold, Watson takes ownership of the property, and a few months later, there's a sheriff's sale. So there was that lien that was on the property was a valid lien. What happened to Watson was he lost his property and he lost his money. And it was after that conveyancers got together and decided that there should be some sort of protection for owners of properties regarding any liens, encumbrances, ownership issues, any fraud that may have taken place, any misrecorded documents, anything that would affect the transfer of the property. So they formed their first title company back in Pennsylvania. This was in 1876, and the first title policy was written for $1,500. It was a home that belonged to one of the founders of the title company. So that is the reason why we have title insurance. It's to protect the buyers from their investment. This is probably one of the largest investments in their whole life. And if you don't have this type of protection, you could be Watson and you could lose your property due to a lien that was encumbered on the property. So the title process, that's a little background as to why we have title insurance. I think it's really important to know that because people don't realize the protection that it provides you and the peace of mind that it gives you. So that is really why title insurance is super important. Now, what is a title search process? Well, it's a lengthy process. As a title company, we look back 40 years on the property records to ensure that there's been no change, that there's been no mishaps in the link of title. You can think of title as a link chain fence. Each link is attached to the chain. And if one of those links breaks, the chain breaks. So when we look back 40 years, we're looking for those breaks in the chain. We're looking for changes in ownership that are not documented. We're looking for deaths in the chain of title. We're looking for anything that would affect that ownership chain. So that's one of the things that we do. And we usually go back 40 years for that. Another thing that we do that's involved in the title search process is we search any liens, encumbrances. We search for any mortgages, any judgments against the property and against the parties. We want to make sure that the person who's selling the property does not have any bankruptcy actions against them. If they do, those would attach to the property, and that would be the issue for the new buyer. So we check all liens, encumbrances, mortgages, judgments, and we also provide municipal searches, things like housing and building searches, fire searches, violation searches. We look for open permits. We provide a lot of this information for the attorney in their due diligence process. Some of it is not directly related to title insurance, but the title insurance company has access to all these records. So we accumulate and put everything together for the attorney. We also analyze, highlight, and we advise on any open issues that need to be cleared. Yeah, so once we have an analysis of the property, we also advise on how these issues can be cleared. So we provide guidance for our clients. Our clients are the attorneys in the transaction and also the buyer if we have a direct relationship with them. We work with the seller's attorney to fix the issues on the property because those issues are the seller's issues, not the buyer's issues. And then we guarantee to the buyer's attorney that we have clear title and that their client will not have any issues going forward. And we provide insurance to back that as well. So the process takes about 5 to 7 business days to actually produce a title report. In that title report, we also have a mortgage schedule, and that mortgage schedule outlines all the mortgages on the property. That gives us indication as to whether a mortgage has been misrecorded, whether a mortgage has been satisfied of record. So we have a chain of mortgages so that we can analyze and look at that as well. So basically, the title search process takes about 7 to 10 business days to produce the title report, and we can close the file as soon as all the problems are solved. Now, when I say that all the problems are solved, most people think there are no problems with title insurance policies or searches, reports. But 1 in 4 reports has an issue with them that needs to be cleared by the title company. So this is a valid process that we go through.
Yeah, I actually have been seeing more and more title issues in my closings. I'm not sure why there's this trend suddenly, but I feel like years ago, when title would come back, there really wouldn't be very many issues. But these days, I do see a lot of issues. So it's really great to know that you work with the clients to fix them, because I know that some title companies just give you a list of, we're not, you don't have to clear title and here are the issues and good luck with that. And let us know when you've cleared all that up. And buyer's attorneys, seller's attorneys, we're not experts on how to fix all these various issues and problems and title defects. So what do you find are some of the most common title defects in your transactions? What's like most common that you see?
We run into a lot of issues, but the most common ones are really liens on prior owners, debts in chain of title, incorrect deeds and mortgages, and heirship issues. And another popular one is fraud, fraudulent signatures. So this is something that we always look at. In fact, when you go to a closing table, you're required to provide 2 proper forms of ID so that we can ensure that all the correct parties are signing the paperwork. So I guess those are the most common issues that we come across in our title search process.
I think in one of our prior episodes, Orsolya and I were lamenting about a couple closings that we had where the sellers didn't bring any ID with them to the closing. I know I've had that happen and I can laugh about it now, but it was pretty outstanding at the moment. Yeah, it is really important to know who's actually selling you your property. So
I was talking to our back office the other day. We have a bench of knowledge that supports the title insurance search process for us. My role is really business development, getting the clients, bringing them in, providing the service, guaranteeing smooth closing. But we have a whole back office that works besides us. And I spoke to someone in my back office the other day who said that there were 5 instances in his career, and he's been in the business for over 30 years, where there was a fraudulent transaction, or he supposed there was a fraudulent transaction. Out of those 5 incidences, 4 of them he was correct on. And this was situations where people didn't have their license with them, didn't have a form of picture ID with them, where the picture looked nothing like them, where the signature looked nothing like them. And we even had a situation where we had a power of attorney for someone to execute on behalf of the seller. And the signatures on the power of attorney document and the signatures on the deed were incorrect. Like they did not look like the same signatures. And that person was not at the closing table. And we had to literally call that person and say, if you want this deal to close, you have to come to the closing table with your ID. And that gentleman came and he understood the reason why we were asking, but it turned out that it wasn't fraud in that case. So in that case, we were wrong, but it's always good to be, 100% positive, even if you have to step back a little bit and make a correction to go forward.
That sounds amazing, and that you do such a thorough and diligent work at Newmark. I really applaud that. Stephanie, you mentioned numerous title defects that you have pointed out, encumbrances, liens on the title. Is there any way, and you said also that it's the seller's responsibility to take care of it, to clear it for the buyer. So is there any way that the seller can ensure a smooth title transfer? Are there any documents that the seller could prepare before he is even entering into a transaction, or when the title report is coming back, or why the title report is being prepared? Is there anything that we could advise sellers to get together in order to make the transaction more smoothly?
Yes, there are many things that a seller can do. Before going into contract, if a seller has an open violation or an open permit on their property, it's important to close that out. The transaction, if the violation is a ECB violation, which is Environmental Control Board violation, there are liens attached to those violations. So the title company sees that as a lien on the property. So those violations need to be closed out before we can actually close title. Some violations do not affect ownership because there's no fees associated with them that attach to the property. But in the case of ECB violations, this is a very important thing. So an owner can be prepared and be proactive. If they have any of these open violations, they can go down to the county registrar's office, Department of Buildings, and figure out how to close those violations out. This is important because if that's not done before the contract is signed, it will hold up the closing process. Now, in terms of documentation that sellers can provide, that's a really good question. And the answer to that is it depends. It really depends on who the seller is. So if the seller is an individual, a person coming to the table, a married couple or a single person, it doesn't matter, an individual coming to the table, it's important for them to have 2 forms of proper ID. They also need to have payoff letters for any open mortgages or any open liens on their property. So let's suppose that there was an electrician that they have never paid. There's a lien on the property. That needs to be cleared before title. So they need to reach out to that service provider and get the payoff to clear out that lien. They also need to do that with their mortgages as well. So it's important for sellers to know this so that they're not surprised when their attorneys say, okay, now it's time for you to step in and do something for us. Now, if the seller is a corporation, it's a little bit different. The corporation has to provide all their organizational documents, their formational documents, their operating agreement. Basically, we need to know that everyone who's in the transaction belongs in the transaction, and everyone who's in the transaction has the authority to actually proceed with the transaction. So we look at the operating agreement of an LLC to ensure that we have the individual who has the authority to sign the documents rather than an individual who may hold a smaller percentage who does not have that authority. So that's the case if you have an LLC. Now, if you're coming out of an estate, this is where the seller can be really, really helpful. So some of the documentations that are required when you're coming out of an estate sale, you need the death certificate. Now, sometimes it takes people a few years to sell the property after one of their loved ones have gone. So it's important to have that death certificate and know exactly where it is. Also, with an estate, you will need wills to be probated. You might have surrogate proceedings. They might be applicable. Heirship affidavits need to be signed, and all things that might be needed to ensure we are dealing with the correct parties. Again, at the closing table, in terms of documentation, we want to know we have the correct parties. So that's really how the sellers or the corporations or the estate transaction can really proceed smoothly to the closing table.
All good stuff. Great information. In the case of when there are certain title defects, what sort of delays are we talking about here? If something comes up right there in the report, do you sort of know oh no, this is going to take a long time, or they should have cleared this up first? Or as far as delaying the closing even, what are we looking at with these defects?
These title issues will delay closing. That is why we address them in the title report so that we're prepared for closing and everything has been addressed beforehand. But something like a missing death certificate could really hold up the transaction. We cannot sell a property without knowing that the person who died is the person who's listed on the deed, is the person who's listed on the will, is the person who's transferred the property to the estate. So this is something that we really need to know, and it can cause a lot of delays. We're dealing with a situation right now where we have a misrecorded deed. So we have a unit that we're insuring that comes with a parking garage, a parking space. This property is in Brooklyn. And it so happens that there was a misrecording on the deed for the parking space. So instead of it being parking space number 1, it was listed as parking space number 3. Now, you would think that's easy. We just get a correction deed. And this is what we thought. We're going to start the process to get a correction deed from the seller's side so that we can ensure that we're insuring the correct unit and it's not owned by anyone else. So in the process of doing that, we also found out that the mortgage that was used to buy the other unit had the parking unit attached to it. Now we have a big problem. So now we can't just correct the actual deed. We have to go back to the lender. And when I say we, I mean the seller has to go back to the lender because that's the seller's old lender. And he has to go back to the lender and say, okay, we need you to release this parking unit out of this mortgage because this parking unit is the incorrect parking unit. So we don't know how long this is going to take. This could take a few months. It could take a few weeks. We have no idea. All the parties want to close right away. But as the title company, in order to protect the parties, obviously we cannot give the clear to close in this type of situation. So that's a real delay. But you can have small delays. You might have a situation where you have a contract and the name is spelled incorrectly, or there's a middle initial in the contract that's not in the mortgage. The name has to appear the same way throughout all the documents for this to be a good transaction, closable transaction. So that's something that can be done really quite easily. So it depends on the issue that we're dealing with in terms of the amount of the delay, but some of them could really hold up the process. And some of them can actually cause files not to close. Like if we can't get this lender to release this parking lot from this mortgage, we're not going to be able to close that file. In fact, we have a turnaround. We have a workaround situation for the buyer. We actually went back to the buyer and said, you're better off buying the unit that was not listed in his deed and just leave everything as is, give him that parking unit and buy the other unit instead. And the buyer is considering it. The only deliberation is that the parking unit he was in contract to buy was bigger than the other parking unit that we're suggesting that he buy. But it might be the only way that he's able to close on his unit.
That's a really great advice in terms to the buyer. And it's a really good segue to my next question, Stephanie, is how can buyers protect themselves against any title defects?
To work with a reputable title company. In terms of protecting themselves, that's what the title insurance company does. That's what the insurance does. Sometimes their attorney will have a contact, but buyers are also allowed to choose their own title professional. This provides them with the ability to ask questions. They can have a direct relationship with the title insurance agent. I often work with first-time buyers and I hold their hand. I give them a step-by-step account on the process and what to expect. And I also make myself available should they have any questions along the way. I love working closely with the buyers, and it's important to have a close relationship with your title company because, as you can see, issues can arise and you want someone who's going to be on your side and be proactive in solving the issues. So you really want to work with a reputable title company, not just any title company, but a title company that will be proactive and stay with you throughout the process.
Thank you so much for that, Stephanie. I feel as buyers' attorneys and sellers' attorneys, we definitely understand the value and the importance of the work that the title company does. But in my experience anyway, I have first-time buyers, and sometimes we're sitting at the closing table. And as much as I've tried to sort of explain the role of the title company, I hand them their title policy. And at the closing, they say, okay, so what am I getting? Because they have their title bill. And they say, what am I getting for this? What does this policy cover? In what circumstance do I need to present this to somebody? Like I have homeowners insurance. If a tree falls on my house, I might call them up. But like, when do I call in this title policy? Under what circumstance? So can you tell us a little bit about that? What are their protections? I basically think they're asking me.
Yeah, they're protected against any ownership issues that might occur. They're also protected against any liens, encumbrances that are on the property, any misrecorded documents. But the real thing that title insurance does, it protects the money that you've invested into this property, and it gives you confidence that you have full ownership of the property. And really, the title insurance is really protecting you from the seller and the seller's past situations. And when I say sellers, I don't mean just that seller. I mean, every seller before that seller. Okay. So if any of those people, those sellers, those people related to those sellers should come out and have a claim against your policy, against your property, then the title company would interject at that point. And there's two ways and maybe sometimes more ways that they help here. First off, if there is a claim, the title insurance company is responsible for paying all your legal fees and defending that claim in court. Secondly, the title insurance process also gives the buyers, and this is a little indirect benefit of it, but it also gives the buyer ability to look for a mortgage anywhere they want. Before there was title insurance, mortgages were localized products where people in the community would lend out money to community properties. But with title insurance, that gave lenders confidence that they were protected against any ownership issues, any liens, any encumbrances, any fraud, any misdocumented documents. Mortgages became nationalized because of title insurance. So now you can go and get a mortgage from California for a property in New York. So that's another benefit that title insurance provides buyers as well. Also, it gives confidence to the buyer that if anything should happen, they're protected for that. And in terms of their protection, if a claim should come in where they lose the property entirely, and I do know of a little story I'd like to share, but if that should happen, then the individuals, the buyers, they are protected up to the policy amount. And the policy amount is normally the purchase price. If you purchase something for $1 million and somebody comes out and says, no, my grandmother left me this house and Here's the documentation. She signed it. It was notarized. It just didn't appear here or there, but it's here now. And we want the house back. And the buyers have to give up the house. They will get their full $1 million back, minus any mortgages or liens that have been attached to the property. So that's important too. Another protection that title insurance does, it protects everyone in the process. So, one of the reasons why we have so many foreign buyers in our market is because we do have transparency in the title insurance process. Everyone knows about the ownership, the liens, the encumbrances. Everyone knows what we're investigating because we produce that product for people to see. So there was a situation once that I'd like to share with you where there was a full claim. That normally does not happen, but there was a situation where it was a house coming out of foreclosure and the title company closed the transaction. There were many liens on the property. The liens went to the payoff lenders. And in the process, when you're dealing with a foreclosure action, the payoff lender has to provide information to the referee that the transfer has occurred. In this situation, the lender's payoff attorney just never provided that information to the referee. So no one knew that the property was transferred and that all the liens were paid. And it went to auction and someone bought it. And there was a title claim. And the title company had to reimburse the buyer the full purchase price for the policy. And the actual person who got it at auction was the winner. And he's the one who ended up with the house. That's more. It's amazing. It's more of a timing issue. That's why title companies, one of the questions that they may ask is, are you going to sell this property right away? Because if you are, they want to make sure that they have enough time to put everything on record and to reach out to all the parties to ensure that this has all been documented. And there are timelines in terms of how long it should take you to record a deed, put a mortgage on record. And title companies have to abide by these guidelines. And if they don't, there are penalties associated with those as well. So there's a lot of benefits to having title companies, and this is the protection that it provides buyers. And in a way, it provides sellers with advantages because they have the ability to transfer their property ASAP as soon as they close the transaction, if they have clear title.
Stephanie, thank you so much for this really convincing and wonderful information and for the wealth of knowledge that you brought today to our podcast listeners. We cannot thank you enough for that. So once again, thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing your knowledge and everything we need to know about title companies. And again, to our listeners, please reach out to Stephanie Lenti at Newmark Title Services. And her email is stephanie.lenti@nmrk.com. Her phone number is 917-224-4840. You can also find Stephanie's information on our website. And once again, we are looking forward to our next episode. And please tune in to Rock the Closing.
Thank you for tuning in to Rock the Closing. This podcast is hosted by real estate attorneys who offer valuable insights. Please remember that the content is for educational purposes only and does not constitute legal advice. Always consult a qualified professional before making any decisions. This podcast is copyrighted by Rock the Closing, and any reproduction, syndication, or rebroadcasting of the content requires written permission.